Roger Cohen, in a recent New York Times op-ed, reminded me of one of my favorite T.S. Eliot poems, The Journey of the Magi. In this poem, the three kings had just finished a very long and difficult journey where they witnessed the birth of the Christ. When they return home, they discover that they are no longer at ease in the old dispensation. They're troubled. They're not comfortable with their fellow human beings who were clutching their old gods. They were gone for a long time, and they now felt estranged from all that used to be so familiar. They were questioning the very worlds that they themselves had formed. One part of the poem remarks, "I had seen a birth and death, but thought they were different. The birth was hard and bitter agony for us, like death, our death." When they returned home and reflected on all that they had experienced, they realized that the birth of Christ meant the death of their pagan worlds, and they could not go back to the old dispensation. Everything was changed by this birth, and the eyes of the three kings were opened, and they saw everything with a different perspective. As we come to the end of the Easter season with our celebration last Thursday of the Ascension, and as we prepare to celebrate Pentecost next Sunday, we realize on this seventh Sunday of our Easter season that truly this birth 2,000 years ago turned the world upside down. And now as the celebration of the Paschal mystery comes to completion, we know better than even the three kings how radically everything was changed by this momentous birth. Even death took on new meaning with resurrection. The radical message that came into the world through this helpless child was one that the world at that point needed to hear so desperately. It was a message of the Beatitudes, of care, of concern, of compassion, of being peacemakers. It was a message that all men and women are connected to each other, no matter what race, color, creed, or orientation. So no wonder the kings were discombobulated when they returned home. This message was against everything that they had, all their ways of living. So every time we complete the celebration of the Paschal mystery, we should also all be discombobulated by the radicalness of the message of that Christ child. Even more so, we should be overwhelmed by the task that has been left to us as Jesus left this world physically in his ascension, and leaves now the message for us to spread. We should be troubled and anxious because we have been left with spreading this message, with carrying out the radical challenge to love God and love our neighbor, whoever that neighbor might be. And if we are honest as Christians, we have to admit that we haven't always done this very well. We only need to look back on history, the last few hundred years, and bring to mind the violence, the world wars, the racism, the Holocausts, and so much other stuff. This radical message of Jesus that so overwhelmed the three kings hasn't been spread all that well. And Roger Cohen writes about this in his column. He writes about the human tendency to relapse into old habits. That as humans, our ability to live out our ideals can be very fleeting. He writes in that column, the history of greed, venality, stupidity, cruelty, and violence is a long part of the human nature. And thus we have a tremendous task ahead of us at this time in history. But as we gather at this seventh Sunday of our Easter season, we know there's hope. Next week we celebrate Pentecost. The responsorial psalm of next week, I will not leave you orphans. And as we hear in that responsorial psalm, the Lord knew that in our humanness we would often fail. But the Lord continually promises to send the Spirit into our midst to give us the strength and courage to start over and to continue to struggle to build the world that Jesus envisioned. And the world that Jesus envisioned is a world where compassion and love are more important than money and material things, where human life is the priority, and where all humans realize that we are all interconnected, brothers and sisters, on this journey together, tasked with caring for one another as best we can in order that together we reach that goal of eternal life with the God who created us. Well, these are tough days on our planet. What we have become accustomed to, it's all radically changed. Life isn't what it was 3 months ago. It's disturbing, it's disappointing, it's painful. We're all in the grieving process. And as we reflect on life these days, what's happening to us, the challenges can either bring the best out in us or the worst out in us. But perhaps as Christians, it can bring us back to what the real message of Christ truly is that rocked the world 2,000 years ago and forced those three kings into realizing that for them life must be different. Well, I wonder if we can come to that same realization because of the pandemic that we are in. Life must be different. Again, Roger Cohen writes, the virus is a searchlight that lays everything bare. He writes that there's a lot in this world that needs to change, and that change is so hard. But he goes on to write, a lot of people in this now very quieted world have experienced some transforming miracle because of this pandemic. The same kind of miracle that the Magi experienced when they experienced the birth of that young child. So let us see this virus as the searchlight that helps all of us become better people. As we celebrate the Ascension last Thursday and prepare for Pentecost, perhaps that's the challenge for us as Christians, that these feasts in conjunction with the virus tell us that we can become much better and more caring people. Jesus has ascended into heaven and left us the task to spread this message. We do it together, and we do it with God's Spirit.